yesterday's news.
Hello, welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers, of course, of yesterday. Well, a new master plan for Nobles Park had been unveiled by Douglas Council recently, which sent me scurrying to the archives to see how Nobles Park may have fared in the press over the years. And it comes up quite a bit for various reasons, often cricket and tennis and bowling matches and such like, but also other bits and pieces about some of its development and some of the features which have been there over the years. We go back to the wartime first off. The Times, Saturday, March the 13th, 1943, the ARP garage at Nobles Park. Further discussions with Civil Defence Commission, we read. The Douglas Town Council meeting on Wednesday carried recommendations from the Parks Committee in regard to the proposed ARP garage at Nobles Park, which has for some time been discussed by the committee and the Civil Defence Commission. I think they're still talking about it. The committee's earlier attitude was disapproved by the full council. The committee have considered a plan for a permanent building which could be taken over by the corporation after the war and used for municipal purposes. The initial cost is £550. The committee recommend that the Civil Defence Commission be permitted to erect the building according to that plan and be informed that after the war the council are prepared to take it over and pay half the cost. At an opportune time after the war, the building is to be completed and adapted for use as dressing rooms and a lavatory and accommodation at a further cost of £498. Then in the Mona's Herald of Tuesday, January the 19th of 1943, there's also talk about an incident in the town council. Alderman Skillicorn trouncing critics, a sequel to the Civil Defence Commission's request of the garage in Nobles Park, a suggestion that certain members of the Douglas Town Council who were associated with the ARP organisation in its earlier days are up against ARP now, was made during a lively discussion at the council on Wednesday on the subject of a garage which the Civil Defence Commission desired to erect in Nobles Park. You just knew there was going to be an argument somewhere, didn't you? In the first instance, the Commission proposed to erect a substantial building and asked the Parks Committee whether in the event of the government bearing the initial cost amounting to £500, the corporation would be prepared to take over the building after the war, as we were hearing, and if so, would they name a figure which they would be prepared to pay for it. The Parks Committee, however, while granting permission for the building to be erected, disapproved the proposal to take over the garage on the cessation of hostilities at a pre-arranged figure, and at a subsequent meeting they adhered to this decision. It then appeared that the Civil Defence Commission suggested erecting merely a temporary structure which could be removed when the need for it ceased. Councillor Bolton at Wednesday's council meeting said he felt it would be in the best interests of the council that a building of the type originally suggested should be erected, and that some offer should be made for it by the corporation, and he moved the reference back to the Parks Committee's resolution. Councillor T. Cowell seconded. What the Commission asked for, well, Councillor A.J. Tier HK, who's a member of the Civil Defence Commission, said the Commission thought that the building would be of some value to the corporation after the war as a garage and store. And he asked the committee to state what proportion, if any, of the cost the corporation would be prepared to pay. If the corporation decided the building would be of no use to them, then the Commission would erect a temporary building. On December the 3rd, the Parks Committee replied that they were not prepared to contribute anything towards the cost, and on the 9th of December the Commission put forward the suggestion of a temporary building, but up to the present no reply had been received. Councillor S.A. Quirk thought there would be a lot of buildings belonging to the ARP organisation on hand after the war, and he did not see why they should take over this building and promise to pay for it at the present time. The proper course would be to let the Civil Defence Commission put the building up and after the war sell it to them for what it was worth. And Councillor T.C. Cowan said that he understood the idea was to put up a fairly substantial building which, in his opinion, would be of considerable benefit to the corporation. It could be put in a place where it would meet future requirements of the Parks Committee, and it could be so constructed that it could be adapted for use as a store for horse rollers, mowers, implements and gear after the war. Well, there's always something to argue when it comes to committees, isn't there? One long cheer at Nobles Park Parade, we read in the Examiner of Friday, August the 12th, 1955. The Queen and the Duke did not hear the 400-voice massed Manx choirs leading the singing of the national anthem and the Manx national anthem on their arrival at Nobles Park. And they certainly did not hear the singing to the best advantage. They did not hear the children cheering. The children in groups on each of three sides of an open square on the neatly trimmed grass of Douglas Corporation's recreation ground made the show. The bursts of cheering rang through the damp and heavy atmosphere as clear as a bell, in sharp contrast to the voices of the all-island choirs and the instruments of the accompanying brass band. It was not the fault of the choir or band that their splendid music did not carry in full volume to the royal visitors on the dais, or that it was completely lost to the assembly of children and adults forming the open square. Shouldn't laugh. With the sudden change in weather, a quick switch of choir and band to the side of the square opposite the dais would have allowed their music to carry with the fresh breeze. But from the position they were in, the impact of the musical honours floated away from the dais and the public. No, we shouldn't laugh. We shouldn't laugh. Actually, the Queen and the Duke and groups of officials and guests alongside and behind the dais heard sufficiently well to realise that the choir and band were striking up the national anthem. But as these few stood to attention for God Save the Queen and for one verse of the Manx national anthem, O Land of Our Birth, the children just carried on cheering, oblivious of procedure laid down. Well, as they do. No reproach on the children and adults in charge of them. As it happened, this natural enthusiasm of the young generation seemed to blend with the music and to be entirely in keeping with what was to the youngsters the thrill of their lives. And the children lost no opportunity during the rest of the royal couple's 20-minute stay in the park to make their presence felt. They cheered long and loud as the royal procession turned in off Glencrutchery Road, and until the Queen and the Duke, accompanied by the Mayor, Councillor R.F. Quayle JP and Mayoress Mrs. Quayle, took their places on the dais directly in front of the park pavilion, and the cheers went on through the singing of the two anthems. Would the kids cheer as much now? I suppose if they were told to, they might. The Mona's Herald, Tuesday, November the 8th, 1955. Now, who remembers this? This is where I'm starting to think, I remember the peacock at Nobles Park. Peacock for Nobles Park was the headline. The offer of a peacock from the Carnegie Trust Dunfermline for Nobles Park has been accepted by Mr. Eric Coward, Superintendent of Public Gardens, and his action has been approved by the Parks Committee of the Douglas Town Council. The peacock is to be sent to the island as soon as possible. I can't believe we had to have a peacock sent over here. The island seems quite overrun with them these days, but maybe they weren't back in the 1950s. I certainly remember going to see the peacock, which was in an enclosure just by the water fountain, and you'd hope that he would display his tail feathers, and being very excited when he did. A roof cafe at Nobles Park. This is the Mona's Herald, Tuesday, January the 10th, 1956. The Parks Committee of the Douglas Town Council have accepted the tender of Messrs McCormick and Davies Limited, renowned builders of the day, for £6,416, the lowest tender received for cafe and kitchen accommodation on the roof of the pavilion at Nobles Park, and additional dressing room accommodation on the ground floor. The town clerk has been instructed to make application to Tynwald for leave to borrow £7,500 for this purpose, and to cover the cost of furniture and fittings. Another feature I remember, the Aviary, Nobles Park Aviary wanted, a suggestion by the Isle of Man Budgerigar and Foreign Bird Society. Is that still going? That an aviary should be erected in Nobles Park, Douglas, next to the peacocks and pheasants enclosure, is under consideration by the Corporation's Parks Committee. The Superintendent of Public Gardens, Mr. Eric Coward, has been instructed to submit a report and estimate of the cost to the scheme to the committee. The Society has been granted permission to hold the annual show in the Villa Marina Colonnade on Saturday, November the 29th. He spent a lot of time, didn't he, looking after birds, Mr. Coward? And in the Mona's Herald of Tuesday, May the 19th, 1959, we read that a bigger Nobles Park plan is opposed, the land needed for extra tennis and bowling facilities. Douglas Corporation need a further 17 acres of land for an extension of Nobles Park when the TT grandstand improvements are carried out, and in addition, the Town Council want to provide 2 more bowling greens and extra tennis courts, as the present facilities in the park cannot fulfil the demands of holidaymakers. Those were the days. An application by the corporation to acquire the land by compulsory purchase was opposed before the local government board on Friday. At the hearing, it was suggested that the park should extend from the present boundary as far as Governor's Bridge. Mr. E.W. Farger appeared for the Douglas Corporation, and the petition was opposed by Mr. Henry Kelly on behalf of Mr. Willie Viner, owner of the land. The corporation did consider buying a much wider area of land, but eventually, when Mr. Viner indicated he would not sell, the area was reduced to the minimum requirements, said Mr. Farger. In the future, it might be necessary for the corporation to acquire the rest of the land. As the board were well aware, the 17 acres adjoining the TT grandstand was required because of the improvements the corporation hoped to carry out there, but it was needed for other purposes too. The miniature golf course had to be moved. There was a big demand for bowls and tennis, and the corporation wanted to provide extra facilities. Mr. J.C. Bragazzi, borough engineer and surveyor, produced to the board a plan of the area wanted for the extension of the park. He said that there was a great demand for tennis courts, and in the holiday season there were from time to time queues of people waiting to be accommodated, and quite often people who wanted to play tennis had to be sent away as all the courts were in use. There was a similar position in regard to bowls. Well, I don't know whether that's the case these days. There's quite a few of the tennis courts have gone now, I think, haven't they? Times change, the habits change, and what people want changes, and no doubt the new master plan for Nobles Park reflects what the next generation might actually want in a park. Suffice to say, the use of parks and Nobles Park is old news. Until next time, cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.